All right. So, good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm TJ from Passend Education. I'm a specialist in highly gifted education, and I'm on a mission to make gifted kids more happy, autonomous, and successful. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about a big challenge that a lot of our parents run into, which is kids that have compulsive behaviors that sometimes harm themselves a little bit. Both two topics really with that. One where we're talking about things like nail biting or picking at skins and other kind of things that actually leave bodily harm. And then also about watching things that sometimes they shouldn't be watching, like morbid things, dark content on the web, stuff like that seems very compulsive as well. And I think it's really important to start with two important frames to both these two challenges. The first one being that a lot of these behaviors aren't necessarily problems immediately, even though it feels like it as a parent when you look at them, but they're more like sensitivity signals. So an intensive, like signals of certain kind of intensity. So the second framework we're going to be using is that of Dąbrowski, which is a Polish psychologist. He like it's kind of old work, but a lot of his work has been used in gifted education as a great way to sort of frame certain challenges that gifted kids run into, as well as they have traditionally been used as ways to identify gifted kids. And these are the 5 sensitivities or overexcitabilities. I've spoken about them at length in other sessions as well, but I'll repeat them here, right? So Dąbrowski in the 1985, basically, he started talking about giftedness as having 5 distinct overexcitabilities. And the first one that he identified was psychomotor sensitivity, overexcitability. The second one was sensual overexcitability. The third one was emotional overexcitability. The fourth one was intellectual overexcitability, and the last one is imaginational overexcitability. So psychomotor is the need for gifted individuals to move around a lot. You see a lot of gifted kids, they struggle to control their, to sit still, to focus on things. They always need to have something in their hands to basically feel like they're busy. And we classify that under a psychomotor excitability. We now know from neurological testing that a lot of these overexcitabilities are neurologic in nature. So gifted individuals have a neurological need for more movement, essentially. Sensual overexcitabilities deal a lot with things like smell, sound, touch. So a lot of gifted individuals struggle with like too much of that at one time. So a lot of kids that I work with will tell me like, oh, I really don't like loud sounds, or they don't want to touch certain things because they feel difficult, or they want to touch them even more because it makes them feel good, right? So these sensibilities, overexcitabilities can sometimes be both a boon and a detriment. So it's not always like a negative. Unfortunately, it often gets seen as a negative traits in school, but they're not automatically so. And we'll go into a little bit more detail later. The emotional sensitivities obviously are all about like the emotional mood swings that you see with a lot of the kids that we work with. Intellectual overexcitabilities is this need for more depth into things. So a lot of deep, curious thoughts and a lot of philosophical thought, big questions that we see them have that they want to see answers to, although sometimes just thinking about them is the thing that they want to do, not even listening to the answers per se. And then the last one is imaginational overexcitability. So this deep, intense, vivid imagination, a lot of creativity. Now, what is important here is that when you have gifted individuals and you have these 5 overexcitabilities, what used to be the case is that people say, oh, that's how we identify gifted kids. And in more recent works, that is being challenged as not entirely correct, because overexcitabilities aren't unique to gifted individuals. But the way I like to explain it to a lot of parents I work with is that actually these ideas of overexcitabilities are present in almost everybody, but gifted individuals again make all of that more intense. So the chance that you'll run into an overexcitability that is detrimental in their development or in their school careers or whatever place that is higher with gifted kids because of the stronger neural pathways in their brain, the more folds that we tend to see with a lot of them, as well as the other bits in the brain that we know are functioning differently with gifted individuals. So these five overexcitabilities, the best way to look at them is that they're almost like a neurological need. So their brains want stimuli in these one or more of these fields to basically feel better, right? And that is again not necessarily a bad thing, because if you have a very vivid imagination, you could be a really good artist. If you have like a need to ask questions, you could be a researcher. You could you do quite well in education specifically, right? So even emotional intensity can be really good. Again, if you want to become an artist, or if you want to play music, having more sense, like more stronger emotions, can help create more beautiful works. The thing, and same with like feeling triggers like sound and other kind of things, again, is not necessarily a bad thing. There's people that basically because of this can do certain jobs that other people can't, because they can pick up better hints of tasting or hearing better, like, which helps again with the musical elements of a lot of things that we do. And then same with psychomotor needs. Like if you need to move more, you tend to move more. We see a lot of young gifted kids move quicker, start walking earlier. So that can lead to actual how to say advantages that can manifest in things like sports. So the idea here is that like this is a core identity of a gifted individual that is neurological in nature, so they don't have a full control over it in the same way that non-gifted individuals have, and therefore we need to guide them how to handle these things. And when you understand that there's a need for them, you have to also understand that like that means if the need is not present, a lot of fear and anxiety crops up. So we can't just say nope, this is not what we're going to be dealing with. This is not something that we desire. We need to immediately stop this. I want to delve a little bit more deeply in some challenges to Dąbrowski's framework, because when we started seeing that not only that basically gifted kids have these overexcitabilities, a lot of psychologists were in agreement that that's very common that we see this with these gifted kids. We also saw that some of these overexcitabilities also present in kids with ADHD and autism, for example. And that's why a lot of people believe that the framework has, if used as an identification tool, leaves gaps for people to be wrongly diagnosed with ADHD, or vice versa. So people with ADHD being identified as potentially gifted when that's not necessarily the case, right? So as an identification tool, it has its weaknesses, and that means that you as a parent, like, why is that important for you? Because you as a parent will see other kids with some of these overexcitabilities, and if it's like, oh, my gifted kid is acting like this, and I see the same with another kid, then maybe they're gifted too. Can lead some people down pathways of wrong diagnoses, or different kinds of hopes, or struggles that aren't always correct. So that means that if you can see these kind of traits in other kids, and you want to help your fellow parents with understanding, hey, that could be a gifted kid, it's important to tell them that, hey, there's also some other bits there. And then let's not forget that there's also twice exceptional kids that make all of these things a little bit more difficult. So twice exceptional being kids with both a learning disability or learning challenge, like ADHD or even dyslexia, and being gifted at the same time. Right, so that's the caveat I wanted to put forward around Dąbrowski, but it's still a really good framework for us to understand what we're going to be talking about next, which is basically about self harm or skin picking, nail biting, things like that. right? So I'll let's start with a little story that is kind of interesting, and I think it's important to help understand like why it's important to look at this, but how it could lead to difficulties. So I did an assessment with a boy about 3 years ago, who was extremely smart. Like on his Cat 4 and his IQ test that we had from this boy, we could see he was gifted. And we normally, when we do assessments, we call them dynamic assessments in Passend. They're sort of designed to see certain learning behaviors. Some of the parents I've worked with have had a report from me like this before. What we do with them is we play a specific kind of games, and these kind of games, smart games, are called. They're sort of like puzzles, so mathematical puzzles that start very easy and then they become extremely exponentially hard over time. And the idea is that when we observe the kids and how they engage with it, we look at like, okay, do they read the rules first, or do they dive in, or do they touch stuff and look at things, or do they observe things first? There's a lot of ways that these kids can engage with these games that tell me specifically a lot about how these kids like to learn, and potentially what kind of overexcitabilities these kids tend to face, right? Because majority of the kids that we assess have already been identified as potentially highly gifted in some kind of form, either through other assessments or observations by teachers. So the aim here is not to identify them as gifted as such, but to see, okay, what kind of behavior do we deal with? And this particular boy was when we were observing him, like in the little run up to the game, because we have to explain a few things, he was basically like flicking his finger a lot. And it was very obvious that he was doing this. And what was happening at one point is that we could see that like the skin was actually breaking. There was soreness to it. And like halfway through the actual game, he started breaking skin. So there was, when we asked him about it, because when we observe things like this, we'll ask him, hey, well, how's that going on? He said he does that so that he can punish himself to try and keep focus, right? So he says, like, yeah, if I'm in class, or if I'm nervous, or I need to focus on things, then what I do is I flick my finger, so I feel a little bit of a pain, and that reminds me to focus a little bit. So this was a very extreme version of that particular kind of behavior, right? So and what was very interesting to see is when we were asking to do things, is that there will be certain moments in between parts of the assessment that we're doing where there will be a little natural pause, and we put them in there for us to see how they deal with boring or stimulating situations. And the moment an understimulating situation would occur, he would immediately start flicking his finger. But if he was engaged with the actual game itself, the behavior would completely stop. Right. So the actual what he was saying was he was doing it purposely. Um, and obviously, when that happens, like as an educator, we have certain protocols with the schools that we work with, where when we get a child and we see that they're causing some kind of bodily harm to themselves, then we have to inform the counseling, and we also have to inform the parents. So there's certain things that we are required to do. And in this particular situation, the boy itself was then like asked, like, okay, do you want to talk about it in counseling and so on? And he actually completely shut down as a result, right? Because of the way that the normal system works, is was okay. We had to inform the parents and the school. Then the school would need to ask him to come into the clinical setting or like a counseling setting. And this school I work with has clinical psychologists that actually work as counselors in the school. So it went through all the right kind of hoops to help this boy. But what really happened is that the boy never really saw it in the same kind of frame that people that think about self-harm normally see this happening, right? Because like all this stuff is there to identify kids that self-harm, that are at risk for potentially other things. I did a whole session about self-harm and suicide last in my last session, so you can look that back if you want. But in this particular situation, the actual reason the boy was self-harming wasn't because he was trying to take control or that he was being bullied at home at all. It was just because like he was so understimulated that he needed something to remind him, and he basically did that. He taught himself, hey, if I actually like hurt myself a little bit, the adrenaline I get and so on keeps me focused a little bit. And that compulsive behavior sort of became the reason that he like how he managed to function in school. But when he went through this whole carousel of like counseling and stuff, unfortunately the boy was really like, I feel nobody really understands me, and this was a difficult boy to speak to already. He was very closed off, a little bit older, so unfortunately trying to get on his good side took a long time again. And that actually took almost a year before he started opening up again, right? And I think it's important that I tell this story because sometimes when we as parents see our kids like nail bite or do things that we don't want to, we have a tendency to try and stop the behavior there and then. But if we basically come in and we say, okay, this is wrong, we're going to get angry at them, we're going to do all kinds of stuff against their will, so we're taking that agency away from them. We, particularly with gifted kids, sometimes we completely close them off. So it is important to understand that that there's a few reasons why these things happen, and then basically the idea should be that you try to identify what the reason is that they're doing it. So and that can sometimes be because they are self-harming, right? So there is reasons why it's important that we still not just let it go, but like how we approach it is a little bit more tricky, and we have to be very mindful that we can close off the kids' interaction with us if we don't. So what are the four things that we see? So the first one is attention regulation, right? So this is linked to the emotional overexcitability. So they're emotionally distressed and there is tension. And in order to deal with that tension, we need they start harming themselves. So this is the one that is a little bit tricky, that could potentially lead to other forms of self-harm. So this one, you need to be able to be on good talking terms with your child. That's the first step. Like, so what is going on here? Like, are like emotionally over excited? Are they too stressed out? Are there too many things that and a lot of stress comes from them feeling like they have too many things they have to do without the choice of doing them. So a lack of agency being there. So that's the tension regulation. The second one is sensory grounding. So this is all about like trying to drown out the other things that happen around them, so the loud sounds or other kind of things, and then like doing this kind of like hurting themselves so that like they don't hear or feel the other things. Now this is very similar to what we sometimes probably run into when we're very itchy somewhere. Sometimes we hit ourselves, right? Like to sort of like get away from that itchy feeling kind of thing. It's the same kind of process, right? So so what is going on there? Is it sensory grounding or is it the tension regulation, right? There's already two things. The other one is restless energy. So is it because they haven't been able to indulge in their psychomotor overexcitability need? So have they been needed to be sitting down a lot? So I have had another boy specifically that basically in order for him to deal with that, what he would do is he would sort of, instead of, he was be asked to sit in class. He was in a Chinese school. He was not allowed to walk around at all. So what he did is he would pretend to sit down by basically doing a squat and then trying to hold that as long as he can until he really couldn't anymore, just to create a little bit of pain that would remind him to sit still. And outwardly, it looked like he was just paying attention in class, but actually what was happening was he was basically just busy doing squats that nobody was seeing. Right, so that's the restless energy trigger. And then The other one, and this one is also kind of tricky. The last one is like often triggered by perfectionism. So are they punishing themselves for doing some stuff wrong? Right, so it's like, oh, I did this wrong, I'm just going to punish myself, therefore I will basically like I've punished myself, I'll remember to do it right. So this is also one that I think warrants like a little bit more counseling kind of approach to things. Or in we actually can do a lot with perfectionism in our classes, because it's a very common trait with the gifted kids. It's technically fear. Like perfectionism is a fear of failure, and to get better at fear, we need to do essentially sort of exposure therapy, which means making them do things that are hard and then letting them be okay with not necessarily getting the exact result out of this, and then self-reflecting on like, okay, what went well, what are the things I want to keep doing, so that they can grow as a person within that fear. All right, so those are the four things. So tension regulation, sensory grounding, restless energy, or perfectionism. Now, so how does that look, right? So if, for example, we take tension, what you tend to see is that first something triggers that tension. Exams, sometimes things that we as parents say to our kids, right? I've had one girl I work with basically tell me that one challenge for her is that like her mom tells her to do things, even though she's already decided that she was going to do them. And then she got really upset with the idea that like, hey, I'm already trying to do what you want. You don't trust me, kind of thing. And then that tension creates a lot of the emotional distress, for example. Now, that then creates a loop where they go, okay, I'm starting to pick at my like I feel tense. I'll pick at my finger. That then creates a little bit of relief, which like distraction, whatever, like, so the nasty, difficult emotion or the lack of an emotion that they're looking for is now solved. And then like that, if they keep doing that, it becomes a habit, right? So eventually it becomes almost subconscious. And once we get to that stage, then it becomes almost compulsive, right? So that's the loop that we go through. So how do we deal with that? Like, what do we need to do as a parent to make sure that this doesn't become an issue? Well, first of all, we need to replace the actual thing. We don't remove it completely. For some of you, you might have read Atomic Habits. It's a book that talks a lot about like how habits themselves have a trigger and an intentional outcome in our mind. And the way to sort of get around them is, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to remove all the triggers, or I'm going to remove all the other or I'm going to change the intended outcome, I'm just going to change the habit only. So I keep the trigger, I keep the intended outcome. So we need to find something that replaces it that's a little bit more wholesome. So, for example, fidgety spinners or putty, or there's like textured objects are really good for this. So, and with a lot of gifted kids, when we're working together, what we're doing is we're basically giving them things to draw, clay to work with. This is the clay therapy stuff that we do with kids, just to keep them busy, so that they can focus on the thing that we want to focus on. Now, the negative behavior would be standing up and walking around, or like picking at their finger when they're bored and things like that. But by us giving them stuff to draw, or by giving them pieces of clay to work with, that immediately goes away. And with the boy that was talking about that, like, was picking his skin till it broke, he basically, whenever he was engaged, the behavior stopped, right? So if we can find something challenging enough, you can actually make that go away. Now, how do you do that with them, right? So first of all, you need to get the kids a little bit on board. Like, what and that means not coming in and saying, you're not allowed to pick your skin, or I'm going to just take some gloves and I'm just going to tape them to you so you can't do it anymore. That's very forceful. And it also makes, like, often a lot of these things are compulsive in nature. They're often a response to fearful or stressful situations. So that actually just makes it worse. So what you need to do is you need to sit down with them and basically make them aware of what's going on first. And that can't be too judgmental. Say, oh, I see this is what's happening. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, is that something that you want? Is that, because obviously picking at your skin and breaking skin hurts afterwards. So there's a time when you can see that they will say like, oh, this is kind of frustrating. But in the moment, it still feels better than trying to do something else, right? So you need to help them find something that is a good replacement. And the best way to do that is to sit down around the family meeting, or at a time when they feel like a bit more open, and basically go, okay, well, like, I've noticed this, like, what things make you do that? Like, what do you feel when you start doing it? And just letting them also explore like why that behavior comes from a certain place. And then you go, okay, but what is then the thing that we, so in order for that to be successful though, when they come back from school, where this often happens a lot, you have to start reducing the stress at home, right? So if your kids are not willing to have that conversation with you, then you need to ask yourself, so okay, is this the home situation a safe enough space? And safe doesn't mean not talking about nasty stuff, but them being able to share how they really feel. Like, a lot of the kids we work with, when we ask them if they think their parents know how they really feel about certain situations, just tell me like straight up, no, I don't think they have a clue, and I don't feel comfortable enough to share this with my kids. Um, okay, so um, the the next step then is like, if you have that, so what can you do to make the house situation more safe, more comfortable? In the Netherlands, one of the things that my mom used to do when we come from school was like get a cup of tea, sit down with some cookies, and then talk about a few things, right? So like, what is the equivalent that you could create at home that makes kids feel like, okay, this is a time for me to decompress a little bit. Let's go down. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. My little one is helping the cats shut up a little bit, which is great. Okay, um, so what could you do that is a bit of a ritual that allows for some talking, some decompressing, and doesn't feel so forced, right? And there's probably thousands of ideas that you could have, but like drinking some tea, or having a little side project that you're working on when they come back is a great option for this. And then you need to basically, in a safe and calm kind of way, highlight the kind of challenges that they're running into, right? So what are you seeing? It's like, hey, I've noticed that you're doing this. Are you aware of this? And if they say, yeah, I am, then the question is, oh, okay, like, well, how do you feel about that? Or what would you want to do about this? And involve them in that conversation. And then the last bit that's really important is that, like, avoid shaming them or punishing them, because it actually makes the situation worse. And this is one of those things where you can identify the behavior, then you can actually have a really good agreement with them about, like, okay, this, do you want to work on this? Like, if they say, yeah, I want to work on it, there'll be a moment where you can't keep talking about it too much. Because like if they're doing it in the moment, they're often in that negative emotional distress, in one of those 4 overexcitabilities that they're dealing with. And therefore, like just immediately pointing it out often gets them more anxious, and then like they'll start hiding it, and then they'll do it even worse when you're not there. Right. So a good opportunity that you have is like, once they say, okay, I want to work on it, and we look at like a habit that we could work on that replaces it, like fidget spinners or other kind of things. It's like you get to that agreement what the things you're going to do together, and then you come up with a little code words that you can give to it, so that you can basically neurolinguistically program that entire discussion around it. So we do this with things that we call the dark playgrounds. When kids procrastinate, procrastination is also a compulsive behavior. When we do the dark playground materials with the kids, we have long discussions about what different types of procrastination there are, what kind of triggers there are, what are the things that make them do these things. And then we make little clay statues of those that then they basically gives them a physical form. And that gives an anchor in their brain towards the whole discussion you've had. And now, when the kids that have gone through this program with us, when we see them procrastinate, we just tap them on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you're in your dark playground," and then everything comes rushing back to them. And that means that, like, just that one word makes them go, "Oh yeah." And because they were involved in designing the stuff they had and talking about how they want to deal with it, it feels like it's their own control, and it's not like a punishment at all. So the idea is, like, can you get to that same kind of state with your kids? And I think if you're worried about your kids not seeing that some of this stuff is a bit more um, dangerous for them, because obviously, like, scratching themselves until they break skin, it can lead to infections and all kinds of other things. So it's definitely something that needs to stop. That, I mean, first of all, I would say trust them a little bit more. When you get them in the calm state, they probably know what they're doing is not correct, or that it doesn't help them, and often they want to do something about it. And then, if they do say, "No, this is something that makes me feel great," then you can say, "Okay, well, why don't you explain to me why it's important? Like, what are the things that you're trying to do?" And then try to convince me from the outside, why is it not bad for you to do? And going through that particular kind of exercise with them will help them with their cognitive dissonance that they sometimes have around this particular thing. Because don't forget, like, it all comes from them having a particular need. So that need is very strong, and it's an emotional need often. So there's a lot less control over it than they think. And then afterwards, they're clever enough to try and explain why they're doing it, why it's the right thing. Because it is kind of scary to admit that you don't always have full control over your behavior. So that's the bits that I say around, like, hurting your hands, that is really important. So let's delve a little bit deeper into the second bit, which is watching dark content. And if you guys have any questions around this particular topic that I just discussed, please type something in chat and give me some more questions. I would love to go a little bit deeper into any of this, or if you have some anecdotes of some of your own kids that went through this, it would be really good to share, because it will be very helpful for some of the other kids, parents particularly, as well. Okay, so while hopefully all of you guys are typing and all that stuff, I'll go into the second bit, which is the watching morbid dark content. So let me give you a little bit of background here, because the particular question came with a bunch of video links to what, at its first face value, look like really innocent, like, children cartoons, but they're basically cartoons that get put into torture devices and things like that. And there's a bit of an infestation on YouTube about these kind of, like, scary yet like funny looking kind of things. Some of them are based on this particular kind of game that came out a while back, which is Five Nights at Freddy's, or there's like another version called Rainbow Friends, if I'm not mistaken. Stuff like that is, there's actual toys of it in Toys R Us and other toy stores. So like there's a lot of stuff around there that we see on places, right? Roblox, and it doesn't see, like, it has like an age warning, technically 12 and up, but obviously it's most 12-year-olds don't play it because they think it's actually not scary enough. And so it seeps into a lot of, like, primary school kids kind of behaviors, right? So the question was, is like, okay, I have a child who watches this stuff all the time, and like, the parents are kind of concerned, like, what can we do with this? Particularly because they keep compulsively watching, and the child in question here hasn't really wanted to even after discussions, didn't want to stop it, basically. So so what do we see? We see interest in scary, violent, strange cartoons, and a lot of repetitive watching of the same unusual, disturbing kind of materials and content. And what might be interesting for hopefully the parents that asked the question and can watch this, is that there's actually a question a while back that was asked about existential life questions that the child was asking, like, okay, what happens when we pass away, like all these kind of morbid kind of thoughts. And kind of a chicken and egg situation. Which ones came first? These questions from about morbid, like about death and existential crises, and what is happening after we die. Whether those came first or the cartoons came first. That's an interesting thing to maybe delve a little bit deeper in. My experience is that often the questions, existential questions, come first, and then a lot of the stuff on YouTube seems to mirror that kind of stuff. So what are the overexcitabilities that are the key drivers in this? So the first one is the intellectual overexcitability. So this need to understand things more. So a lot of gifted kids in classes run into trouble because they keep asking why, and they want to know why things work. They want to go deep. It's sometimes so deep that even the teacher can't even explain what's going on. Right? So this intellectual overexcitability, there's a lot of curiosity there. Like, what is going on? What do we need to do? And the more taboo a topic is, the more, like, it's like the more that sort of drives towards, oh, I want to know more, because like we are not likely to talk about a taboo topic, right? So it's like, oh, what happens when you die? If that question is being asked in a classroom setting, and a lot of kids don't have those kind of deep thoughts yet, a lot of educators and a lot of parents want to not engage with that particular conversation because it's maybe not the right time to have it, right? So with that, but that actually makes the kids more curious. And I think you can start seeing like why the draw for these particular cartoons can come up as a result. All right. So the second one is imaginational overexcitability. Right. So a lot of these cartoons, particular, are very, like weird. They're really out of the box. It's the stuff you don't really see. And this imaginational overexcitability that a lot of gifted kids drift into, that really connects with this, because it's definitely things that we don't tend to see in mainstream. Unfortunately, what is mainstream now is not as easily defined anymore. Like, the original term was monoculture, when everything we saw was coming from the TV and the cable, so everybody was watching the same stuff, and the internet has sort of made that impossible as a concept. So everybody watches its own stuff essentially. So the idea of a monoculture, where everything is the same and a bit safe, and we're all watching wholesome TV shows, is a lot more difficult, right? So because kids just have more access. And what is really nasty about these particular cartoons is that there's certain versions of them that are purposely done in a way that makes it very hard for YouTube to flag them as graphical content, and therefore they end up even being shown in YouTube for kids, for example, which is a big problem. There's quite a lot of controversy around this. Like, Roblox itself has a lot of problems with that as well. So it is a known issue, right? But that, again, the imagination overexcitability with gifted kids just makes that worse. And then the final one is the emotional overexcitability. So when you see graphic content, it makes you feel scared, and it makes you feel angry, or it makes you feel disgusted. And then the point of watching stuff like this is to feel emotions. Right. So again, like the intensity with it, and how that then interacts with each other is one of those things where it sort of draws to each other too. What is important here is that they're not out to seek harm most of the time. So with gifted kids in particular, what they're looking for is intensity and meaning. And because they're taboo subjects, as parents, we often don't talk about them early enough, in the hopes that they won't run into them. And therefore, when the time they do run into them, you get this really difficult situation where it's like, okay, now you as a parent have identified this is something I don't want my kids to see. Therefore, I need to have a conversation with them now. And it's like, oh, this is not good for you. You shouldn't be watching this. But they have already watched it, and like, to their mind they go, yeah, but I'm still here, I'm not dead, nothing happened to me, therefore, like, but there's something wrong there. Like, if you told me this is bad to watch but I don't feel it, like, are you telling me the truth? And that's when they'll often revert to like, either lying about it, or if they're a little bit more strong-willed, they'll just defy you directly. Now, what is also important to know is that, like, if this stuff is consumed specifically through YouTube, is that when the algorithm grabs hold of the fact that they're actually more engaged with this because they're not clicking through, or they're going back and rewatching it, the algorithm will start showing them more and more of it. Right. So this is one of the real dangers of, like, how YouTube functions, is that if something latches on to their imagination, or their certain kind of needs that they have, it will show them more, and then the habitualization of watching this stuff becomes more and more intense as well, right? So, and even if you then say, oh, you don't not allowed to watch this, like 5-10 minutes later, they'll be watching it again. Right. So the curiosity that they often express into these particular kind of videos makes them more likely to trigger the algorithm too. Right. So what do we do then? Because we have a few options as parents. So the first one being is, like, we just completely switch off like social media altogether. Right. And that's for some people very popular kind of idea. I think at certain ages this is absolutely correct, right? So there's more and more voices and academic work showing that there is a benefit to try and withhold this sort of exposure until they're 12 years old or even later, right? So if you think that's the way you want to go with your children, I think that's a fair decision to make as a parent. The difficulty is that it will create some rifts between what the kids in the class see and what your kids see, and that has some impact on their social interaction. So that is the downside with completely withholding and not explaining why. Right? There is a chance that they will start watching secretly. Right? So that there is deception that we know that some of the kids are capable of. So that means that the difficult discussions you're probably going to have around how to watch it and what it is, you can forego by completely removing it altogether, but you'll trade them in for more difficult discussions and questions or deceit, right? So the unfortunate, I'd say that you're not going to make it easier either way. It's just about, like, okay, like, how strong do you feel about the need to withhold it? Now, even Steve Jobs, I don't know if this is an urban legend or not, is allegedly was withholding iPads from his kids, right? So there is an element that where I say, okay, withholding some stuff completely, I totally understand it if that's the way you want to go, but it does come with a lot of resilience from yourself as a parent, right? So the other option is to limit it. So to say, okay, well, first of all, parental controls are very important in this, of course. The amount of time, and then particularly the kind of habits around, like, how to and how to engage with it. So is the stuff being consumed just willy-nilly by the kids, or is it like something that they can get to if all the other stuff that is required to be done is done? Right? I'm a big fan of making sure your kids have chores to do, because they need to learn how to do chores if they want to be productive human beings at some point, and having responsibility about important stuff in the house makes them actually more happy individuals. So there's a lot of good reasons why those chores are important. And then if those chores are done, there can be time left to engage with some kind of watching of stuff. If then they still land on these particular, like, kind of shows, then there is a few things that you can do that can really help. The first one is that you need to then sort of be engaged with watching it together with them, right? So what would you need to do? Right. So first of all, you need to have a conversation with them, right? So they watch something, can you watch it together with them? If they watch this, have a discussion about it. So what did you like about it? What was this about? What do you think that meant? Right? Like, what, all these kind of questions are important for them to help develop themselves. So talk about what happened. So stay curious yourself. That's the first, like, so you need to show some interest in this so you can use it as an opportunity to actually bond a little bit with your child around it too. Then you need to add context. So like if they see things that they don't understand, like that's when you can have a conversation. Okay, what does that mean then? Like, what is a rack? Like, what does that come from? And there might be some interesting history lessons. There's a whole little there's kind of a rabbit hole that you can go into, and obviously you need to be. This is where you can guide stuff a little bit, like what is more age appropriate. Like if they're 11 years old, like 10 to 11 years old, are getting to like year 6, like they're starting to talk about things like middle ages and some dark stuff. So there will be opportunities for you to talk about some of the darker nature of the world, in a way that actually becomes educational for them. Um, so you need to set some boundaries, though. So there's definitely some things that they should not be watching, but if you're bringing those boundaries from fear, then it's very likely that they're either going to engage more with it, or like, because it's like you can make them scared, say, oh, this is not something you watch, it's very scary, this is it, and they won't. And then sometimes when then and this is actually something we learned in the Netherlands around drug abuse. I'll explain that in a bit. But if the facade of fear for this particular topic happens to be not true, they often go, oh, if what you said about this being too scary to watch isn't true, what else isn't true? And it becomes a bit of a rabbit hole. Like in the Netherlands, we educate children on drug abuse and what it does to you very early on, not by telling them, oh, all drug is immediately bad and all that kind of stuff, because like, unfortunately, most drugs don't really function that way. Right, so that's why some people, when they use drugs for the first time, if they've been told, "Oh, drugs are evil, bad," and all that kind of stuff in all kinds of ways, and then they take some drugs and go, "Oh, this isn't the case." There's almost no safety net anymore. Whereas like there is dangers to drugs and there is reasons why you shouldn't be doing that. And therefore you can educate the kids on what drugs are and like what they do and how to protect yourself if stuff happens, like much more constructively. And as a result, the drug abuse in the Netherlands is one of the lowest in the world, right? So this is a very similar kind of situation. Don't make it a fear-based, don't do it, but guide them on why this is not necessarily productive, or why this is not applicable, or like why it doesn't explain that existential crisis of what happens after you're dead, for example. So another way to deal with that is like is to offer something more, even more interesting, right? So that's why I like watching with them, because oh, that's something interesting. You see that wheel. Why don't we go and have a look at like medieval times and how how bad it was to live back then, like, and why we've moved so much further in society towards like away from this kind of stuff. And you can do this with mystery. You can a lot of these cool mystery shows that you can watch instead. There's games that do this, which is also kind of fun. Like there's a lot of games that have like these kind of themes in them. So just going around finding fun board games that explore these kind of topics in a way there's a little bit more engagement with them. And then looking for more complex stories that often do the same thing. And when you look at it, for example, for a lot of gifted kids, a lot of them tend to drift towards these teen books that have a lot of these things in them. So Percy Jackson, very, very like popular book range with a lot of my like year 5, 6-year-olds. You have Harry Potter, of course, and those books can get pretty dark at some point as well. Right? And then to me, I think reading that and is probably better than watching these particular YouTube shorts that, like, sometimes you think you've completely taken it away, and then they'll watch it once and then it just be back into their algorithms. It's very hard to police that, for example. And then the timing of it, which is the managing of the time, is very important too. So when would you let them engage? So don't do it before sleeping, and so on. So this is also like when you see them engage, you can also look at the history of some of the stuff that they've done and see if there's certain things they keep repeating. Because there is a particular part of this behavior, like if they're just scrolling and they're going a little bit through and they watch most of the videos like once, you could basically say the curiosity is what is driving this. But if they're watching the same thing over and over, almost obsessively, then there's a little bit more that you need to do. And that's probably like really figuring out, like, okay, what is the particular thing that makes them watch this. And then again, like if all the stuff you've been doing to get more conversations out of your kids by creating that safe space, and being able to have open conversations that they want to have and really listen to what they say, they will share with you what's going on. If they don't, that's the first thing to fix. Like, how do we get that kind of trust? So yeah, so let's recap like what we have basically here. So we have talked about skin picking, and particularly the 5 excitabilities that have a need, that drive towards that. Understanding that that need is there, and that it's better to find a way to replace the habit, but you only can do that if you really understand the trigger and the intended outcome. And in order to do that, you have to talk to your kids. You have to ask them. And if you can't ask them yet, then the question is, how do I fix that first? Like, what is it? What do I need to do to create a situation that can have that particular kind of conversation? The next thing is then about like talking about the videos and what you can do there. So what we said there was that, like, again, it's the intellectual, imagination, or emotional overexcitabilities. It is definitely not, and most of the time, not an intent to seek harm, but it's a way to look for intensity and meaning. And then what you need to do is you need to be curious in what they're doing, which means listening to them again, help them create context with what they're seeing, and trust and guiding them towards like what is the way to reflect on what you've seen, and is this something that you want to do? And then set boundaries. You don't have to accept all of it, but when you set boundaries, it is important that you give them agency. So like need to be very clear on what your line is, and then you need to figure out with them what fits within those 2 lines. And that could be it can be in a range of things, or it could be 1 or 2 things, but that is a discussion that basically needs to be had. And you need to have that discussion before it all breaks loose. You have to do this in a calm setting, and that means that you might need to manage the time when these things are happening, or even more so, you need to find out something you can do after school that helps reduce the overexcitability overload, any of the other kind of things that could potentially be triggers to start this behavior in the first place. And I think with that, I have all the things that I want to say. So keep in mind that gifted kids don't just think differently. They physically and mentally experience the world in a much different way than most non-gifted individuals do. Therefore, a lot of the intensity, the need to look for this curious, like stimuli and all the other kind of stuff, all these 5 overexcitabilities are a real thing that gifted kids need help with. And you as a parent understanding what they are is the first step to understanding, okay, what is the long-term steps that I need to do? And what are and how can I then keep the discipline for myself to make sure that we get to that intended outcome? And I think unless we've got some questions, that will be it for this week. Thank you all for coming in. Hope it was very useful. And we're going to have our next session next week, Thursday, if I'm sorry, Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, next week, Wednesday, same time. So love to see you all there again. If you have any more questions, please fill them in on the questionnaire form that you get as a parent. And love to see you guys next week.
You said Wednesday.
Oh, did I say? It's
Yeah,
Tuesday.
yeah, it's fine. I'll send them a reminder anyways.
Okay. 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 I'll stop the